Hello everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Reading Party podcast with Megan and Lexi. This episode continues our season looking at stories set in the Roman Empire and its periphery. Some of the material includes themes of violence or sexual assault. It is not suitable for under 18s. We hope you have your favourite beverage and snacks ready to go, because we've got our teas and are ready to start spilling the tea on our latest ancient story. Hello everybody, welcome back to the Reading Party. This is season 3, our Rome extravaganza, and today we are talking about the 2014 action-adventure movie Pompeii, starring Kit Harington, who does an awful lot of kind of looking broody and not smiling because we're not allowed to smile, and it's Pompeii, so everyone dies. But the joyous thing about watching a movie titled Pompeii is you know everyone's dying going into it, so you're not horribly, well, you're mildly depressed, but you're not surprised and depressed, which is nice. And to talk to us about it is the wonderful Dr. Victoria Austen. Victoria, thank you for joining us.
Yeah, you're welcome. I'm so happy to be here and to talk about the cinematic masterpiece that is Pompeii 2014.
That is absolutely a way to describe it. It's not necessarily the way I would have gone myself, but no. Excellent. Yeah. Before we get into the movie itself, would you mind just giving an introduction about who you are, what you do, and where our audience can find you?
Yeah, so my name's Victoria. I'm currently a postdoctoral fellow in humanities and classics at Carleton College in Minnesota. I'll be finishing up that postdoc at the end of this academic year, and then I'm taking up very excited to say that I've got a tenure track position finally at University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. I'll be starting there this fall. So coming to the end of this current job, moving into the next one. And yeah, my research is really on kind of Roman gardens and landscapes at the most niche level. But in general, I'm really interested in kind of Roman social history, material culture, art history. And I've taught a lot of classes to do with obviously the Roman world, but also the reception of the ancient world in general in modern media. And so I've taught a class on the ancient world through film a couple of times. And this is how I came to Pompeii, and a lot of my own research related to kind of domestic space in the Roman world. Obviously, I use a lot of evidence from Pompeii as well. So this is kind of two of my loves for reception and material culture kind of come together in this movie. So hopefully I'll be able to have a good discussion with you about all things Pompeii.
I think it's going to be wonderful. And I personally have approximately 800 questions about the social history shown in the movie. So you are absolutely the perfect.
Yes. Okay. I can definitely try my best to answer all of those.
You also do at least one kind of public outreach project that I know of. Could you tell everyone a bit about that and where they can find it?
Yeah, so I'm part of a project called Peopling the Past, and we create open access digital media resources about the ancient world. And you can find us at peoplingthepast.com. And on our website, we have blogs, videos, and also a podcast series. And we look at real people and what they were like in the ancient world. So trying to focus a bit more on, not that top 1% that a lot of scholarship kind of traditionally focuses on, and, like, what are the real people in the ancient world living, and how we study them. So yeah, really great to be part of the Peopling the Past team. And then obviously I'm also myself on Twitter, now X, I still call it Twitter. So yeah, you can find me there.
I think everyone does, really.
Yeah, I think you can find me there, Vicky_Austen. So that's a good place to find me.
Fantastic. Thank you. Lexi, I've completely ignored you. Hi, how are you? It's nice to see
No worries. Yes, I'm very much enjoying this whole takeover, because usually I know I jump in and do it. So I'm like, no, it's good. I'm enjoying this. I mean, I guess the only thing I really have to say is let's start, Megan, with your fascinating and always off the cuff recap.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear the summary.
Yes, I don't script them. I think long-time listeners will know these are completely unscripted and occasionally contain a fair amount of swearing.
So you're in for a treat, because these are very off the cuff.
we'll go for it. So I had not watched this before. I started it last night and then finished it this morning. And it was definitely an experience. You open with the slaughter of many, many Celtic peoples. Fascinating. And the miraculous survival of a young boy who is unnamed. We don't know who he is. We do find out that the people that are slaughtered are horsemen. Didn't know that was a thing. Excellent. Also, they're in Britannia. I'm 98% sure the Celts were a French group.
Yeah, using Celts. Yeah, we can get into that.
Yeah. That was the first thing that made me consider maybe we didn't do a lot of research for this. It was great. There are evil Romans being evil. They kill all the people, women and children. Everyone is dead. And then it cuts quite drastically to 17 years later. And the young boy is a very grown-up Kit Harington, and he is a gladiator. He is scum. Everybody hates him. He doesn't talk to anyone. He's also very, very good at fighting, apparently. Where he learned these skills, we don't know. And he's so amazing that they decide to take him out of Londinium, which is like provincial backwater, and move him to Pompeii, because why wouldn't you? So he gets to Pompeii. On the way, he meets a very attractive, wealthy, upper-class Roman citizen lady, kills a horse on the way in because the horse just collapses. And apparently the only way to rectify this problem is for Kit, as a horseman, is to kill the horse. And I'm aware that when horses break legs, typically they are put down because they don't heal very well. But I don't know what was wrong with this horse. It didn't have a broken leg. Anyway, the horse gets killed. They continue into Pompeii. And the very attractive young lady, who we find out is called Cassia, kind of looks at him and is like, oh, he's such a pretty slave boy. How wonderful. But she goes home. You find out she's been living in Rome for a while. We're not sure why, possibly just for fun. She's come home very unexpectedly, but her parents are delighted to see her. And she doesn't really tell them what happened. And at the same time, Kit, who we much later find out is called Milo, which really trips me up because we have a cat called Milo. It was the weirdest experience.
Also, not a name that I would associate with.
No. Very strange, but he's called Milo. He goes to the arena and is picked on by this gladiator because he killed his brother. And I'm like, you realize that it is literally kill or be killed. Like, I'm sorry your brother died, but it wasn't a personal choice really on Milo's part. Anyway, they kind of gang up on him and he shows his fighting prowess and beats them all up and is then thrown into a cell with Atticus, who is an African slave and is a champion. And we find out tomorrow, Atticus is going to compete in single combat and then he will be freed after like 20 years of being a gladiator. And at this point, I said, no, he's fucking not. yeah, no. And Milo essentially tells...
Spoiler, you're not getting freed, yeah.
Not happening. Milo tells Atticus, you realise they're not going to free you, right? And Atticus says, it is their law. We've already established by now that the Romans are just generally evil bastards in this. So... somehow, Milo and Atticus end up at a party being hosted by Cassia's dad. And they get kind of looked over and Atticus gets selected for an evening's entertainment by what appears to be a wealthy, older Roman citizen lady. And somehow Cassia's horse goes mental. I mean, in the background, you've got Vesuvius kind of doing its rumbling and smoking thing. So the horse is a little frustrated and concerned about this. So Cassius takes Milo. She's like, bring that slave, takes him to the horse. He calms the horse down. For some reason, gets on the horse. And then Cassia goes in and also gets on the horse. And I'm like, what is the logic here? Really? What is going on? And they escape. They like ride off into the hills and understandably are pursued quite fast by some Roman guards because she's a noblewoman. He's a fucking gladiator. And we find out also that the senator who has come to Pompeii to do business with Cassia's dad is like evil bastard Roman. They're all evil bastard Romans. He's more evil bastard, I think, than the rest of them. And we find out that Cassia actually left Rome early because he was making romantic overtures. She didn't like him very much. I don't like him very much, so I don't really blame her. But he sends his guys out and they bring them back. And there's a very touching scene while they're on the hilltop where Cassia says, go, run, you can be free. And he says, what fate will that leave you to? I'm like, fucking hell, dude, she's a Roman noblewoman. She'll be fine.
Yeah.
You can go and not be a gladiator slave anymore and probably die. And he's like, no, not doing that. So they stay for reasons entirely unknown. I mean, plot, but apart from that, unknown reasons. He gets beaten because evil Roman senator, whose name is Corvus, played by Kiefer Sutherland, he is very upset because he wishes to marry Cassia and she's making like moon eyes at Milo over there. I'm like, dude, you're a fucking senator. He's a gladiator. He's really not any competition to you. Anyway, moving on, not getting into the social dynamics of it right now. They end up having the whole arena thing, and the senator changes the plans, or someone changes the plans, so that Milo and Atticus go in first, and they essentially reenact the battle where Milo's entire family was slaughtered. Fascinating choice. They chain a bunch of slaves to a giant post thing. Other slaves are sent in as the Roman guards, and surprise, surprise, Milo and Atticus, who is now his friend, they end up essentially slaughtering everyone, which is not how it was supposed to go. Milo was supposed to die, so Cassia couldn't be with him. So Corvus is very upset about this, very upset, and sends in his like super elite fighting Roman dude called Proculus, who apparently is even better at hand-to-hand combat than a gentleman who has been fighting every single day for the last, 15 years maybe? But no, he's Roman, so therefore he is inherently better. And also, complete aside, Corvus and Proculus are the two evil bad Romans who were there at the beginning of the movie killing all of Milo's parents. They have not aged a day.
They have not aged a day.
It's like magic. Milo has grown up into a whole ass human man. And these two Romans are still in the prime of their life, slaughtering other people. Fascinating stuff. Anyway, long story short, the whole arena collapses because Vesuvius is doing its Vesuvial thing and erupting. Corvus sends Cassia back to the villa. She gets locked in and like the whole thing starts tumbling down. You're like, oh no, Cassia will die. She will die just eventually. And it kind of, the rest of the movie is taken up with people trying to escape from Pompeii and utterly failing. Even the people who manage to get on a ship are crushed by a massive tidal wave. Atticus, unfortunately, is killed essentially in the arena by Proculus. He saves a woman and her child first, which was very awesome. Good job, Atticus. But then they get Cassia and run back to the arena to get horses. For some reason, the arena is full of Romans. Don't know why, never explained. The arena has collapsed. Everyone left. Why the Romans went back, who the hell knows? Mystery. But Corvus steals Cassia, ties her to a chariot and fucks off. Atticus says, you go. You essentially go get your freedom. I'm going to stay here and fight this one Roman dude. Yeah. Why Vesuvius is actively erupting? So they stay there and have single combat while Vesuvius is. I'd have been running personally. Anyway, so Corvus and Milo run. They have single combat. Do you know if is Milo going to win? Yes, of course he wins. He wins. He gets the girl. They ride the horse out of the city. The horse is too slow. They're all going to die. Milo says, go, get on the horse and go. And she's like, I won't leave you. And shoos the horse away. I'm like, oh my God, you are children. You've known each other for a whole 24 hours. What are you doing? So they stay and they kiss very passionately and then are engulfed by a pyroclastic flow. That's kind of the end of the movie there. So there you go. You don't need to watch it. You've got all the important parts.
So I will just, in one sentence, how I describe it to people based off that summary. It's like Titanic crossed with The Horse Whisperer, crossed with a documentary on Pompeii. Those are the three elements, because it's like a girl meets boy, very kind of stereotypical romance movie, but set against a historical event. And, we also have the same social dynamics of Titanic in that there's the upper class woman. She's been promised to some other elite gentleman, but she sees someone of a lower class and is like, no, that's my guy. And, also crazy turn of events, like Rose in the Titanic, they meet because she's trying to jump off the side of the Titanic. And it's this is obviously when you fall in love with someone. The same as, when you're breaking a horse's neck, at that moment when you meet eyes with someone.
It's a very romantic moment, Victoria. I don't know if you realize this.
I mean, I'm of course, boy meets girl, boy kills horse, girl falls in love with boy. That's how it goes, right? And they're basing these huge life decisions and how they're responding to a huge natural disaster based on someone that they've met very briefly. So that's like big Titanic vibes. But then, yeah, the horse, I mean, when I've watched this with my students before, like, we have often discussed that, like, the horses are kind of the MVPs of this movie. Like, I'm standing the horses. But yeah, there's like weird horse whispery vibes like that are going through, and like horse metaphors as well, like the way Corvus talks about wanting to subjugate like Cassia into marrying him. He talks like with this like awful horse metaphor of like, I'm going to break you, and then when you're broken, and I'm like, ugh, it's gross. But yes, so big Titanic vibes, but in the ancient world.
Going to the horse whisperer thing just briefly, because that also bothered me. Like, it's on a par with Corvus and Proculus not aging.
Yes.
Milo is from this like tribe, assumedly of horse people.
Horse people.
But he leaves when he looks to be 7, but has the like genetic ability to talk to horses. He hasn't learned any of this shit, or if he has.
No, but doesn't he somewhere say something about like, I could ride before I could walk?
He does, yeah.
I'm like, okay, but sure. But yeah, again, very kind of unexplained elements of the story.
It was, like I said, an experience. And I have the first question that I have for you is, some point during the film when Cassia and Milo are talking, he's like, Cassia is listening to him with like big, wide, innocent eyes. And he's explaining that the Romans are horrible, evil bastards, and they killed his entire family. And she's like, the Romans are horrible. I understand. And he's like, you are a Roman. What the hell are you talking about? And she gets very offended. I am not Roman. I'm a citizen of Pompeii. Is this a thing?
No. And this is one thing I wrote down. Like, I do not understand. I feel like the whole of the film could have been made, like the story would have still made sense without this angle of like there being this weird, like, that Pompeii is being positioned as this kind of provincial town that has its own identity and is like anti-Rome in some way. And there's this thread that's like going throughout the whole movie about that. And I'm like, that is not a thing. Like, not in the way that they're selling, like in the movie, this idea of someone in Pompeii would be like so very viscerally like, I am Pompeian, not Roman. Like, no. I think, based on the context of the movie, I think they wanted to create this added tension between, you had these generals coming in from Rome, like the real bad guys. There's kind of like levels of badness, because there's like the Romans that are central to Rome, but then the Romans in Pompeii, they're the ones, ultimately the main characters, that obviously side more with Milo and Atticus, and they're seen as like supporting people. And obviously the love story is between Milo and Cassia. And so you get, I think maybe they wanted to just kind of separate Cassia's family and kind of their morals or virtues in a way that was separate from Corvus and the rest of the kind of Roman imperial army. But I don't think they needed to make it political like that. I think they could have made that point of distinction simply from family dynamics, because it was clear that they had a very loving relationship with their daughter and they were very concerned with her safety. And I feel like that would be enough to have a hatred of Corvus without having to add in this weird Pompeii versus Rome angle. So, yeah.
What would the like self-identification have been for people in cities that were part of the Roman Empire, but not like in Rome itself? Would they have fully considered themselves to be Roman? Is it more of a local thing going on, or do we not really know?
I think it entirely depends on which area we're talking about. You know, Pompeii is actually really not that far from Rome. And this is why the Bay of Naples, where Pompeii is situated in general, it's kind of seen as this kind of elite coastal. It's like where the elites would have their, you know, seaside villas. It was within close enough proximity to have that kind of, we'll go for the weekend, or, you know, this kind of idea. That's a very different relationship to say, actually, you know, a full, like a Londinium, like an actual provincial capital or somewhere, you know, outside of the Italian peninsula. I think that's a different relationship. You know, I definitely think that locals living in much further geographical kind of distance away from Rome, their identity is going to be a much different kind of mix of, obviously you've got these Roman parts of their identity as part of the kind of colonial model, but at the same time there's interesting mixes of like the original kind of indigenous culture with the Roman culture. It's definitely not a one-way process, that idea of cultural exchange. You see this a lot in religious practices, in particular, this idea that the indigenous population would have a local deity that they worshipped, and then the Romans come in, and rather than saying, well, no, we have this deity that you're going to worship now, if those two deities kind of like aligned with what they represented and what they did, then you'd have like these local regional cults where they'd kind of merge the central idea and the local idea into this one kind of regional version of the god or the goddess. So I think that is one aspect of identity. But I think in the Italian peninsula, I think, you know, especially by this time, they're very much operating in this kind of, we're all Roman. There's not that distinct regional identity, I don't think, at least, compared to, say, you know, a Roman Syria or a Roman Britain or locations in Gaul or even Spain or, you know, somewhere like that. But I think not completely, but I definitely think we can talk more about identity in the Italian peninsula at this time as more homogenous in that way. So I just don't understand this unnecessary tension that they've created, because I just don't think that would have been a thing. There's just no evidence for that kind of intense political tension. Obviously, every individual town has its own little local identity, but not to the extent that they would be going, I'm not Roman, I'm Pompeii. Like, no, that's ridiculous.
The way she said it reminded me of like someone from Glasgow saying, I am not English.
Yes,
like,
yes.
That kind of visceral, aggressive. I'm like, okay. Ooh.
I mean, as far as I'm aware, like, I just do not know of any kind of source material that discusses that kind of relationship. And I mean, you have, for example, the letters, which I actually quite like about the framing, the opening scene of the movie, where they show like sections from Pliny the Younger's letters where he's like describing the involvement. And like, obviously he's there and his uncle are there because like they have property in that region, but like we don't think of them as...
They're not Pompeian, they're Romans, yeah.
Like, yeah, it's not Pompeii, like, or from the Bay of Naples. So that idea of this distinct kind of cultural identity split, I just don't understand. I'm like, this is not a thing. Like, what are you doing?
No, you know, I saw it very much as an insert, just like it only served the conversation she was having.
Yeah.
Right. Like the dialogue was stilted anyway. So I was like, oh, this is not landing. But, you know, you have him being like, they have this sweet moment with the horse, but then he's all, yeah, Romans are bad. They killed my family. I'm very angry at them. Death to all Romans. And so it seemed very much like a spur of the moment, like, oh, no. Yes, be angry at them. But I'm not that. So I just want to make you clear.
I'm not like those other Romans. That's basically what.
Right. So she was like, I want to make you clear. She's like, I'm from Pompeii.
Like,
so like to me, it was a very much just an insert in the moment. Just like panic, right? Because she was like, how do I convince the guy in this classic next step in our meet cute to like,
yeah,
no, I'm not his enemy. I am from next door to his enemy.
Well, like I said, I think they could have made that point quite clearly just by going more in depth into more the kind of gendered family dynamics to mark like Cassia's distinction and what she is feeling and this hatred of Corvus. Like, I don't think you need the political angle to be making that point, because what she is experiencing, I think it is very true to many elite women, an idea of an arranged marriage, an idea that, you know, you're trying to make a good kind of quote unquote political match and, you know, love not being necessarily part of that equation. That's very much the reality of an elite woman's experience at this time. And I think being able to go more in depth into that and maybe like explore some kind of, there were kind of hints of it with conversations with her parents, this idea that they kind of recognized that she didn't have the feelings, but there's this kind of like societal or family pressure to be attached to Corvus. And then this idea that like, he's just not a nice man, but she has to be subjugated by him, essentially. I feel like you could have made so much more of that and made it like an interesting kind of social, gendered exploration of those power dynamics, as opposed to inserting this weird like political angle to it.
I think that would have worked better as well, paralleling it with Milo being a slave. Like,
Yes.
she doesn't realistically have a lot of choice over who she ends up marrying. He has no choice over what it is that he's doing with his life. Like, there are better parallels there, I think, than just we both hate Rome.
Yeah. And I think because they're kind of an interesting case study in that they're both kind of lower down on the hierarchy, but in different ways, obviously, in that, and there are these interesting intersections of both like gender, class, and status in the way that they are both kind of under the top, which is the patriarchal like political system. But then Cassia is a woman, so she kind of loses agency in that sense, and that means something different, but she's then elite. So that's obviously she has a level of power and privilege that non-elite women wouldn't have, for example. So she has this kind of interesting relationship to the patriarchal power structure as a woman. And then Milo has his own separate, but it's working within the same hierarchy. He has that same subjugated relationship to the people at the top. But then it's interesting then when they come together that then she is then relying on him in more of like a, I need your like manly strength. And so when they come together, there's like this interesting kind of intersection of like the different genders. And when they're having that conversation, when they run up the hill with the horse and she's trying to set him free and he's concerned for her safety, but she's like, no, but because I'm elite, it will be okay. Like that's better for me. And that they kind of hint on these really interesting kind of dynamics in that way. But I just feel like they could have explored it in more detail and it would have added more depth to the story if they would have done it that way.
Would have fleshed out the characters quite nicely.
Yes.
Given them a bit more than just this kind of scowl and petulant female teenage thing going on.
And like that idea that when he saves her horse at the beginning and then she gets back into the carriage and then her like female, I guess she is probably an enslaved person, like her female companion is like, oh yeah, but did you look at his muscles? I'm like, oh my, like really? Are we doing this? Are we really doing this?
Obviously, he's meant to be a thirst trap. Like, that's the thing. And I was like, oh, okay.
I mean, the opening shot when we see him 17 years later, he comes out into this, it's raining, we're in dark Britain. And I'm like, yes, of course, always raining in London. You know, he comes out, he's into the arena, it's dark, it's broody. And like literally the first thing you see are his abs. They are like protruding through the darkness. And I'm just like, this is ridiculous.
He doesn't need armor though, Victoria. As a gladiator, he's allowed to have all of his internal organs exposed because that just makes it a better show.
I mean, if those are his real abs, I'm impressed with the movie, but I don't know if they're CGI'd because, you know, in a film like 300, I know that they did CGI the extra muscles on. So, you know, I don't know the answer to that question. Real or not real abs?
Luckily, I looked it up and I did. I was very curious. I was kind of just because I was
Lexi is answering the questions we all have.
The important question, are they his real abs?
So they are. So apparently the whole reason that he even accepted to do the film was because Kit Harington said, I've never had a role quite like this that would demand a physical transformation. So he said when he got the script, his character was described as like the most cut dude. And so he was like, I demand.
But he literally is just playing Jon Snow in Pompeii. How can you say that he's never had a role like this? It's the same role.
I know. So I was like, I don't know why you said that, but he apparently thought that. So it was at his request because the director wasn't going to make him do it. So he went to the director and said, I would like to be on a training regimen because I would like to actually get physically fit for this. And they were like, are you sure? And he was like, yes, I would like to try. So he went on like the most brutal bulking up routine. He apparently, the internet is a fantastic and wild place because it told me that he went to the gym 3 times a day, 6 days a week. and went on some crazy diet and like got himself all bulked up.
I would rather just have a body double. Like, this seems like a lot of work.
Oh yeah, but he said he was in the best shape of his life. But it was an interesting trivia fact that scene where he comes in and is introduced and you see his body, they shot that the very last thing because he was the most cut at the end of filming.
Oh, interesting.
So they shot that last and then put it first, and I was like, of course you would. Of course you would do that.
See, this is the kind of info that the viewers want. Like, this actually weirdly reminds me of a conversation I was having with some of my students the other day about the film Troy, which I'm sure we all have thoughts. And we were talking about how, again, that's a film that, much like this one, you're establishing kind of masculinity straight away with the like presentation of the character. And there's the first scene where Achilles, like, we see Brad Pitt and he's just like totally naked and just like, you know, he's walking around and he's just been with all of these women. And the fact that I learned in that conversation is that that is not Brad Pitt's actual butt. He has a butt double.
I feel cheated.
Amazing.
So Kit Harington went through the regime. Brad Pitt did not. It's not his butt.
I feel so cheated right now. Like, how can you rob us of your backside, sir?
So, you know, kudos to Kit Harington for putting himself through that, because, I mean, they come through. They're the movie.
Yes, he made it work, although I heard it gave him terrible body dysmorphia issues after when he went on his cutting regime to cut down to normal weight. So, poor guy. We can really say he sacrificed for his craft.
Right, yeah.
Is how I'll put it. Also, I was going to say, in terms of Cassia's parents, couple things there. First thing, though, were y'all just like super distracted by the fact that it was Trinity from The Matrix? So I was kind of expecting her to like do some Trinity-esque like body chops.
This is where I admit that I have not ever watched The Matrix. So I was like,
Did not distract Victoria.
Yeah, so I wasn't, but what I was distracted by was Kiefer Sutherland's accent. Can we please talk about like, and Megan obviously is a fellow Brit. I mean, what was he trying to do? I mean, what was it?
I'm honestly not sure.
Because I think he was trying to be British, but then I'm like, why?
He did, but it went no accent until like there's a word that very clearly you would not pronounce in an American way. And then that was the only word in like an entire sentence that he would try.
And I wonder if it's because, I mean, if you've watched many films set in ancient Rome, there's, you know, the trope that all the ancient Romans are actually, you know, British gentlemen.
Like British Oxford graduates in disguise, yeah.
That's how we portray them. And I'm like, was he trying to do that? Like, I don't know, but it was straight away. I was like, this is one of the worst accents I've ever listened to. Like, why bother? I mean, it's so bad.
Yeah. It just the casting choice was interesting. I feel like they were just like, you look mean and glowery and are tall. Let's cast you. Let's not care about that. But you know, that's the same thing for Carrie-Anne Moss, though, for her mother. I was like, she doesn't really have a good accent, but like she did not have a lot of dialogue, so they could kind of like hide her bad accent away. I don't know. I'm just like, it's very distracting. And I think you should either just let the actors, if they can't produce like a good replica accent, just let them be American. Just let them talk.
Yeah. Yes. Like, we're already suspending, like,
they're already not supposed to be speaking British anyway.
Yes. And also that whole idea of that, you know, everyone just can speak the same language, you know, especially that's one thing with these gladiators. Like, they always quite, in these films, and, you know, we can talk maybe a bit about how the gladiator aspect of this film is very much just a reception of previous films about gladiators. But I think one thing that movies featuring gladiators do pretty well is give this indication that these are people that have been enslaved from all over the Roman Empire. You know, this is a very kind of like multicultural group of people. So that's good. But then there's always this, we're just all able to communicate with each other straight away in the same language. And I'm like, magic. I don't think so. But I do love the guy that played Atticus. That was a highlight of the film for me. Like, he's good.
He was definitely the best one. Like, the best character generally, but also one of the most convincing actors in the thing.
And like, as Lexi said, the dialogue, not the best. The script was a little stilted, but like with the dialogue that he had, I feel like he was quite earnest about it. And like, I could build that character up and it kind of made sense, but some of the rest of it was just, I don't know who did the script, but
it was very confusing. I mean, and the whole gladiator bit, I was like, oh God, is this like, I was getting a lot of like knockoff and not well as done Ridley Scott gladiator types of feels.
Yeah, I mean, it totally, there's so many elements. There's so many elements that from basically both from the Spartacus movie and also Gladiator, I'm like, you've kind of just taken all of the cinematic tropes that were established by those two movies and you've put them as a subplot within our Titanic Pompeii movie. This is it's like Titanic love story mixed in with, but like, how do we, and I feel like this is very symptomatic of a lot of films about the Roman world in that I just think, I wonder if one of the reasons why they put the gladiator angle in there is because it's just seen as in the popular imagination. It's like such a core part of Roman identity and people understand it and get it. And they understand that kind of mix of the spectacle and the celebrity mixed with, but you're then enslaved and treated brutally and horribly. And there's like that, again, really interesting kind of social and cultural dynamics in that role of a gladiator in this kind of weird mix of celebrity, but then you're also disdained because and dehumanized because you're a slave. And so I wonder if that's why they included that angle in it. Because again, you could have just done it with maybe...
He could have been a groom, for goodness sake.
You're trying to do too many things because it's like a gladiator movie, but also a love story movie and a disaster action movie. Like maybe take out one of those things.
And people listening might think that having so many genres represented in one film is an awful idea. And they would be right.
Yeah.
They would be right. It's too much.
It's too much. Also, I feel like we need to talk about the depiction of the eruption itself.
Please.
Because,
Please.
Yes. Okay. So some elements, good. Some elements, like, what the fuck? Like, I just... Okay, so I'll start with the positives. I'll start with the positives in that I really liked how they at least demonstrated that the eruption happened in stages, that there's this idea kind of going even one step further back. They have this recognition that there'd been earthquakes before. People are aware that they're living near an active volcano. Like, there's that scene where Milo experiences a tremor for the first time and Atticus is like, oh yeah, like
this happens sometimes.
The mountain speaks to us sometimes. Like, I'm like, oh, how ominous. Just like, and so there's that recognition. And then as it's building up, so you get like the earthquakey bit first, and then you get more of the kind of what looks like lava-y fire kind of stage. And then there is this bit of a lull and you get the tsunami tidal wave element. And then it's only at the end where you get like the ash and the pyroclastic flow. Now, scientific evidence shows us that that's probably actually occurring over more like a 48-hour period, maybe into like over 3 days. Now they've condensed all the stages down into a shorter time span, but I did appreciate how they at least... And I've read articles that like volcanologists, is that the word?
I think volcanologists.
The people that study volcanoes said that it was actually very good on the kind of basic science of how it worked. So I was like, okay, good. However, one, there were not flaming fireballs coming through the sky at all points in the eruption. One of my good Twitter friends, Alicia Matt, she also loves the film Pompeii. Whenever we talk about it, we just send each other the same gif of the fireballs coming through the sky. We're like, fireballs! Like, because
it's not a volcano unless there are fireballs everywhere.
Yeah, so like,
you need to tell people what's going on.
Like a meteor shower is not happening like in Pompeii. So that's one thing. One thing not so great. Also, yes, we know that there was like a kind of tidal wavy like aspect to it, but like an actual tsunami cannot be stopped by a wall. And that's what happens in the movie.
Okay, so Atticus is right at the harbour, and there's this massive wave, and everyone is running.
Everyone's running.
But then a child falls down, so he runs back, gets the child, grabs the mother, and runs for this tunnel. And they get the other side of the tunnel, and he stops and turns around. And I'm sitting there internally screaming.
Yeah, and then the gates close.
What are you doing? You're going to die.
I was like, well, this is when they're going to die. I was like, this is the point that Atticus dies when I first watched it.
Yeah.
I was like, oh, the little wall stopped the big tsunami.
How nice for them.
Yeah. So there are like pros and cons. So I think in general, like at least showing this idea, because I think there is still a kind of public idea that it's like hot lava that killed everyone. And that's, as we know, like not the case. It's this kind of pyroclastic flow that essentially that happens kind of almost after you've had the earthquakey, like fiery kind of aspect. And it's the intense heat from that pyroclastic flow that actually essentially like suffocates the inhabitants to death. And so you do get that sense of the kind of progression of what happened in the eruption. But as I said, they also condensed it, but also a kind of positive way that they also showed there's a big element of the movie, as you said, where they're all trying to escape and they're trying to get to the ships and they're trying to escape. And, you know, we think that is pretty true because, and especially if you take the stages of the eruption and we think it was more like a 48 to 72 hour kind of process, this is why we don't have a ton of bodies in Pompeii. Like actually compared to the amount of citizens that we know live there, like at its peak, maybe 20,000 people living there, we don't actually have a lot of bodies. And that also aligns with this idea that a lot of people did have the chance to escape. Like they fled the region, probably thinking that at some point they could come back. There had been previous earthquakes and volcanoes where that had happened, but obviously they weren't able to come back after this one. But, you know, that does speak to this idea that is why we actually don't have as many bodies as you would maybe think. And I think it also speaks to them why the kind of casts of the human bodies, which is obviously a key framing in the movie as well, they become so symbolic and kind of emotive as these symbols because we don't have like tons and tons of skeletons. It's just these like freeze frame images of like, you know, 2-3 individuals here and there. We don't have that kind of widespread evidence of the people. It's more the stuff that was left behind. And clearly there couldn't have also been the huge fireballs because the material evidence just does not show like that level of destruction. Like obviously things have been buried, but we would see so many more like crater holes and actual destruction within the remains. And that just doesn't seem to be there. So as with all Hollywood things, they've kind of amped it up to 100, but the kind of the basic trend of how the volcano erupted is actually pretty good.
Yeah, I had like questions, you know, like when I saw the way that they characterized, and I'm sure, right, CGI'd the buildings just sort of collapsing. I was like, man, you know what? Actually, it reminded me of like Disney's Hercules when Herc runs into the column and then like collapses the entire building. I was like, that's what you're doing, just thanks to fireballs and an earthquake?
Yeah, it wouldn't happen. Yeah.
What were your thoughts on how well they kind of recreated the ancient city? Because obviously Pompeii is fantastically preserved. If you haven't been, if you ever have the opportunity, absolutely do it. It's amazing to walk around. But how did they do you think, for the recreation side of things?
Yeah, visually, I actually think pretty good. So I did a bit of research into kind of how they went about it. And it makes sense that this is how they did it when I was then rewatching the movie last night, is essentially they used drone footage and then they flew the drones over the archaeological park. And then they see, you know, as there's the scene at the beginning where they're kind of doing a bird's eye view kind of across the city. That was created by actually flying a drone over the archaeological park and then adding the CGI on top. So the actual layout and the fabric of the city is based on the actual city. And I read an interview with the director that said they wanted to do that to kind of create this level of realism. And so I very much appreciated that they had this idea of we're actually going to use what is there to our advantage. And there were many elements that I thought were done really well. I loved how, they show that you're entering the city and you're coming down the main road and it has the tombs and the burial memorials on either side, because that's very true. That is how you would enter the city. I really love the scene where Cassia and it's Ariadne, isn't it? I think her friend or enslaved worker, they're kind of like, oh, we need to get out of this carriage. We're like stuck with all the traffic. And so it's quicker to go on foot, probably accurate to go on, quicker to go on foot. And then they're kind of running through the city and, there's loads of people and you see they stop at what looks like a kind of food/bar little establishment and they're going past all the houses. And I'm like, yeah, that is actually kind of how it would be. And it was vibrant and it was colorful. And like, they really went to town on showing that there's lots of frescoes everywhere and all of this depiction of the kind of vibrancy of the ancient city I really appreciated. And it really contrasted to me when you watch Gladiator, the film Gladiator, and the shots where they come into Rome for the first time. And it is like this almost empty, like pristine, white, gray, like I don't even know what it is. It's just like so gleamingly white and like there's no color at all. And there's also like not really any sense. It's like very sterile, the depiction of Rome, until you actually get in the Colosseum. In Gladiator, they kind of seem to make that distinction. Whereas I think Pompeii, you got this sense that, everyone's mixing together and there's different people, different groups of people as well, mixing, like the idea that Cassia would be walking through the city, like she could be, like that's true. And I really loved the depiction of her parents' home as well on the cliff, which I'm guessing they must have kind of use the Villa of the Mysteries as a kind of inspiration for that, because at Pompeii, there's obviously the main city, but the Villa of the Mysteries it's kind of just outside of the city and you kind of have to go along a little coastal-ish path to get to. And I think they use that as inspiration for this idea that Cassia's parents were maybe some of the most important people. And so they live in this like big villa on the coastline. And there were loads of little fun details in their house that I was like, oh, I appreciate that. Like they showed a peristyle garden. And I was like, I research gardens. And I was like, there's water. And like, you really got the sense of this kind of multi-sensory experience. Like there was a lot of people going on, people around. There was lots of color. You had statues, you had frescoes, you had real plants. I mean, as a scholar of gardens, I appreciated that they had garden frescoes inside the garden. I was like, because that is what they did. I was like, these little details that no one else would care about, but I cared about them. And that idea of having the social gathering and also having like the enslaved people on display as well. Like we know that happened. Like, all of these little things, I think in general of giving that depiction of a Roman city, I actually think it's one of the better movies. And whether or not that's just because we have so much evidence from Pompeii that like you are able to recreate it in a way, like the evidence is right there. Like you shouldn't fuck it up really. Like it's right there. Like we can still see what large parts of the city look like. It's not like a huge leap of imagination to think about. But I did appreciate that the director did seem to want to really engage with, okay, so this is what we have on the ground. And I'm like using that to then recreate the city, which I thought was nice.
I really did enjoy it. And I do feel like the recreation of the city possibly was better than the characterization of the actors. Like the city itself is a better character than the main actors' characters are, which
Pompeii as a character was good.
Yeah, no, they did well there.
Yeah. And again, I think it's kind of frustrating because it has all the elements to make a really good movie. And I think like the script was just not good. You could have made that exact same movie with the exact same plot with a better script and it would be 100 times better. Because also they're not bad actors either. When you look at their other work, it's not like they had really terrible actors. I think the script was just really stilted and it really did a disservice to, there was like a lot of potential there for making, as I said, you could have done this really interesting exploration of class and status and gender, could have done a really cool exploration of the different stages of the volcano and like all of these elements. And the kind of Corvus aspect of it, you could almost take that out. Like, he could have just been a gladiator actually in Pompeii already, and she could have just been an elite young woman, and they could have...
Exploring that, yeah.
Yeah, you could have, I don't know, maybe he worked in their house and he saved the horse. Like, you could still have the horse aspect if you really wanted, because you didn't even need to have a Corvus to explore the idea that Cassia couldn't marry for love.
No, I mean, it's like you said, it's a fundamental fact of her existence as a Roman woman. It's not a thing.
You could have just had a bunch of like elite Pompeian men, like showing them maybe trying to make friends with her dad, or like him having conversation. Like, yeah, you didn't need that whole, you've got these outsiders who are Roman, and, you know, an enslaved gladiator could hate on Rome as a concept, again, without the Corvus element.
And I think the problem I have with Corvus and with Proculus and the Romans is a thing that we've seen, I think, in our previous seasons, bad guys being unrelentingly, unremittingly bad. They're just like bad, evil people. So it makes them feel, they're not real, because very few people are just...
It becomes comical. Like, there's no depth to it.
Yeah. You're like, I know that you're going to be an asshole. You're going to kill someone. We're supposed to hate you. You're going to be a borderline rapist. It just is how it's going to go. And it makes the film much less interesting. And I think you're right. Removing that whole like evil Roman thread would have made a much more interesting, probably much more well done story.
Yeah, because you could have then developed a lot more scenes around kind of Cassia's relationship with her parents, like had more scenes that explore like the dynamics of that family and the relationship as well between like Cassia and different types of enslaved people as well, because you see that she obviously has her female companion, and that's kind of one type of enslaved person. And then you have the people like working in the stables in her house, the servers. Then gladiators are obviously a subsection of the enslaved population as well. But that's not a monolithic identity. Like, there are, what it means to be an enslaved person in the Roman world, that can kind of manifest in a bunch of different ways. And I think those different relationships, it just would have been really nice to kind of explore in that way. And I think if you'd have had Milo as, say, a local Pompeian or someone that's been there for a while, you could have also explored, and you kind of got this a bit with Atticus, but that kind of like celebrity status dynamic with gladiators, that they're like revered and people know who they are. Like, there's lots of graffiti in Pompeii that, it's like, oh, we're rooting for this person. Like, people had like favorite gladiators. Like, they are kind of celebrities in that way. But that also then you have this uneasy dynamic where the minute they're outside of the arena, they are just completely dehumanized. And you do see that in the film, but I just think it could have been done. Again, it's like the dialogue. There was just, all of the bad guys just seemed like so like cringy bad.
They needed moustaches to twirl, really.
Yeah. I mean, there was the guy with the curly hair that like owned. I was like, what is going on here?
He's like a caricature. Come on, man.
Yeah, they are. They're like caricatures of baddies. And I think a good baddie is someone that's like a bit kind of complex and interesting in that way.
You love them, but you hate them, but like you want them to, like, to me, the perfect villain was like a Game of Thrones Tywin Lannister, because like you hated him, but you wanted him in every single scene because he was interesting.
Yeah. Whereas like Corvus, one, I didn't want him to speak because the accent was terrible. And then two, like when he did that line about, and she was like, you can't break me. And then when he said, but you will be broken and I will break you. And like, if that line had been spoken by a character who had this like fully fleshed out development, and he didn't have the cringy accent, and he wasn't just this caricature of a bad guy, I think that could have been really powerful, that you then kind of show that, yeah, she does in one kind of category have all this privilege of being elite, of having wealth, but in then being the female part of her identity, she's being spoken to like she is a horse. Like that you can be broken. And again, that like dehumanization aspect. But because he's a joke of a character, when he said it, like I'm almost laughing because I'm like, this is just so cringe.
I mean, I laughed way too much throughout the entire film. I did.
Yeah.
I was laughing way too much. It was actually really sad. I mean, by the time we got to like the end with the volcanic eruption, I was kind of laughing. I was just like, dude, I know this went on for a while in real life, but I was like, this eruption's taking too long. Can we just have a fireball land like on your head and be done with it? Like, this is ridiculous.
I mean, it was quite cute when she was like, I don't want to spend, what was it? I don't want to spend our last moments running. And then he's like, don't look at the pyroclastic flow. Look at me. Look at me. And like, it's kind of brutal. But again, like that moment with a good script, it could have been so good.
Like if they'd known each other for more than 12 hours and they had a pre-existing friendship or something.
Like you see this idea of it developing over time, or just the more I think about it, just take out the Corvus subplot. We don't need him. We don't need you, Keeper.
Can you imagine though some of these lines, but like delivered by or just like set in Gladiator because they developed that's what. So I was like, so the breaking of the horse. Could you imagine like honestly, Commodus saying that to Lucilla right before
it would be so,
you know, and I'd be like, oh my God,
it would be so good. No, like he kind of does that because there's that dialogue in Gladiator about like, you've been a very busy little bee. And he's like using the metaphor of the bees. And he's like, I'm going to squash the bee. And like, what are your busy little bee? And it's so creepy and good. But yeah, if Corvus had delivered that line, I'd have just been laughing.
Everything out of his mouth was a joke. Also, you're right. I mean, the accent was just so distracting. So I was like, I don't want to. But it's interesting. Yeah, I think for the most part, even with the stilted dialogue, like we do see a pretty good sampling of the different sort of people who would have existed in, you know, ancient Pompeii. The only thing I was a little sad about is we don't see very many children. But one thing I did want to ask was Cassia's parents are obviously very rich. They have this nice resort villa. I think there was some reference somewhere to like, this is a vacation town or resort or something. But would her parents or someone at that villa have been the owner of a Pompeii? Because I feel like I might like I kind of expected maybe I would see some young children, young people, and I didn't.
Yeah, actually, that's a great question that I hadn't thought about. I wonder if it's just because there would definitely have been children. Because, I mean, just based off of the dynamics of Roman slavery, you could be an enslaved woman and you could give birth to a child. If you gave birth to a child, then that child is like not legally yours. Like there is no, you do not have legal rights to your own body as an enslaved person ultimately. And so even your child that physically comes out of you is not your own, like legally, which is obviously horrendous. And then that's like this idea of like you're born into slavery in that way. And so there are going to be children. And actually, now I'm thinking about it, in other movies as well, they rarely show kind of like young children.
Yeah, we don't have like children. And I don't know if it's because like it's a cultural thing where we just don't want to show like enslaved children. But I'm also like,
yeah, I wonder if that is it. Like this idea of,
it might just be the difficulties of getting kids in movies like this. And like, unless they're main characters, it's not worth the trouble.
yeah.
But you could have made like a Pompeii, like the people who care for the horses, or so, because that's the thing about them. They were the gifted, trained children. Like, yes, they're still enslaved, but like you still train them to do the things. And like when you see them in frescoes, like they are with their master, and like they're serving them at a party. And so we have like a party scene. So I'm like, why are there not just some random like at least like show me a running child to be like, can I refill your cup? You know, like something.
And I guess the only hint of that we get is right at the beginning when we see that Milo is essentially like found and then sold into slavery. And then we assume in that 17 years has then been kept as an enslaved person and trained to be a gladiator. So that's the only hint really of like children being part of the enslaved population. But I wonder if it is just like this cognitive dissonance that we just like don't want to see that.
Because it's like they'll give us how many adult slaves, they'll give us women, they'll show people being whipped and like all this terrible treatment.
But never children, yeah.
But yeah, like the concept of even showing, like, okay, yeah, probably people don't want to go see like a child being whipped. Like, I get that. But I'm like, at least show like...
that there were children, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'd never thought that. But even when I'm trying to think of the opening scenes, where they're coming through the city. I mean, there must be children in those like street scenes, but
I mean, but then, right, there's like different classes of slave children. So there's like your gifted pueri, and then there's like the normal slave children. And then so I'm like, okay, well, you could show some children, which would be better than no children. But I'm also like, I want something to show me. Like, it's interesting because like not even something that's pretty good, like HBO Rome. I don't see children. And I'm like, these are like the richest people. They definitely would have had some puer.
they tend to start at like teenagers, or unless the child is like central to the plot. So I'm thinking Gladiator, obviously, little Lucilla's kid. Is he called?
Yeah, Lucius.
Lucius, that's it. I was like, it's not Lucillus. That's the wrong way around. I'm masculine. I'm creating a masculine name out of a feminine. That's not what they did. Yeah, Lucius, but he's central to the plot.
And he's elite because he's supposed to be apparently the next emperor. But I'm like, at least show him like playing with other children. But you could make them the pueri. So then he's I'm running around my big palace with my puer. Like, it's perfect, but no.
Yeah, they just show them with other adults, really. So that's interesting, yeah.
That's why I was sad. It's like he has no friends. Because like that one scene where he's like play fighting when Commodus wakes up and is like, what are you saying? I'm like, why wouldn't you play with a child? Like, okay, fine, you could play with like a adult slave, but like children.
Yeah. No, I haven't thought of that actually, but that's very true. So, no children.
We have about 3 minutes left before we need to let Victoria go. So I want to know from both of you, favorite parts, least favorite parts, and would you watch again?
Okay, well, I know that I have to watch it again because
You're contractually obligated.
Because I've taught ancient world through film, but I've also taught a Pompeii class, and I'm going to be teaching my Pompeii class in the fall. So I always show it as like a fun thing. It's like, we've learned all about Pompeii. Now you can do what we're doing and you can dissect this movie about it. So yes, alas, I will be watching it again. I think it sounds ridiculous, but my favorite thing is just because this is the thing that I always come back to. And as I've already said, the fireballs, I'm like, that's the image that I have when I think of this movie, like a meteor shower just coming through. Just like, cool. But also, I don't know, it's almost like my favorite parts are the bad parts because they're funny.
Yeah, that's fair.
Do you know, it's like it's a so bad it's good kind of film. My least favorite part from the historical perspective is what we've spoken about, like having this weird like Pompeii Rome quarrel. Just pointless. Doesn't see. I'm just like, no.
Oh man. Yeah, and I probably would rewatch. I don't know if I'd rewatch it alone in my house unless I was either very bored or just, I feel like this would be something maybe I'd just watch with friends for the pleasure of critiquing, I think. Or again, if I was going to be, in a class or something, fine. This is where I shamelessly admit I grew up a very big horse girl. I rode horses and I still ride horses and I love them. And so definitely anything with horses, I love. I mean, her horse was gorgeous. And
like I said, they are the MVPs of this movie, the horses.
They really are. So the least favorite part, obviously, was killing the horse at the beginning. Because that's the thing. I was like, we only tend to put them down if they are professional racers. Because that's the thing. When you look at modern racing, they're bred and we're ruining their cannon bones right in their legs because we want them to be, so thin and brittle and the way that you have to have their body specification. So that's kind of a modern thing that definitely made it in. Because if you have a horse that is not a racer, it's been done many times. You can rehab a horse's broken leg. I mean, it takes time, but you bind it and then you kind of elevate it and then it's fine. So I was like, you could have saved it, but I guess they didn't really care about that.
Didn't even have a broken leg though.
Yeah, I think it just like fell over.
Yeah, you could totally rehabilitate that. So I didn't enjoy the killing of that. So that made me sad. But that, and I guess the other equal disappointment were the accents.
Yeah. And the script. The script was the worst part of the movie.
The stilted script that just was like no saving, not even by a great cast. Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. I will probably not watch again unless it definitely is in the it's so bad it's good territory. But if I want a film that is so bad it's good, I'm going to watch actually Helen of Troy because that is just awful. But a more fun awful than this one. Like everyone dying. I knew everyone was going to die. It's Pompeii, but it's not like a fun ending.
Yeah, it brings us down a little too much to be. I think if I want a good romp, you said Helen of Troy, so I think I'd say Gods of Egypt. But I want something that's
so bad it's good. Yeah.
Terrible, entertaining. So this ends. It starts on a downer. It ends on a downer. So much of it just doesn't make sense. The plot is ridiculous. I mean, the fact that like the kid is clearly alive, and I'm like, wouldn't you check to make sure people are dead? Like I know that.
Oh yeah, like right at the beginning, huge plot hole.
Right, because I'm just like, there would be no film, because if a real Roman army were doing it, they wouldn't just assume that the child who is one moment in the arms of the woman is dead. I'd be like, you might want to check that. So
just gonna go have a look see.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, Victoria, thank you so much for joining. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much. Yes, I'm so happy to have discussed all the
things.
All the things. Yeah, I was like, I cannot wait to discuss this accent with Megan as well. I was like,
yeah, it's an interesting one.
These are the wonderful things that happen when you know that your co-host is British. So like anything that has bad British accents, you're like, oh, this is going to be a fun one.
Like, I have a visceral reaction to this.
Yeah. So, bringing on experts is like, they're some of my favorite episodes that we do, I think, because it's always so fun to have someone bring in outside expertise at it, a dimension that we can't.
Yeah, and just a different perspective, but yeah.
So we loved this. Please come back. We don't know what yet, but please come back. We'll have to find something else.
Any other Romany films, or even not, just like, I mean,
just to have fun.
Just to have fun. Yeah.
Perfect.
I like anything.
Amazing. Great.
Well, thank you both, audience. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hey, thanks for listening. Don't forget to leave us a review, and you can also follow us on social media at The Reading Party Podcast. If you'd like to leave us a book or movie suggestion, then email us at thereadingpartypod@gmail.com. See you next week.